Hey everyone, welcome to the YMS Podcast. We are your hosts, Colin Mansfield here, and I'm joined, as always, by Seve Carnera. I'm going to say hi to the people out there, Seve.
Hello, everybody. Hey, Colin, how's it going?
It is going well. It's summer. It's hot. I'm sure it's hot out where you are, in Dallas as well.
Yep.
We've got a fun episode today. This is the first in a series that we are calling Overhyped or Helpful. And we're going to do a few of these episodes kind of spaced out. And today we're talking about autonomous vehicles. We're talking about drones and electric yard trucks. Are those overhyped or are they helpful as they apply to the logistics and supply chain, and more specifically to what our company does, which is yard management? Seve's been working in the yard management space for over a decade, has a lot of experience, some hands-on experience with some of the technologies that we're going to be talking about today. And I have been working in the yard management space for less time and have less experience. So this is going to be a fun sort of interview style, but overhyped or helpful. So when we say that, what we're kind of to define these terms, right? Overhyped is going to be, there's a lot of buzz about it in the industry. There's a lot of people talking about it in news articles and positioning, but it's actually not what it claims to be, right? It's overhyped. It doesn't deliver on the promises that it claims. Helpful, on the other hand, is something that's legitimately beneficial, that can make a lasting impact on your operation. We are looking at this through the lens of yard management, which means basically that area outside of a warehouse, distribution center, plant, any sort of shipping facility, the area between the dock doors or the building and the gate. That is our domain. That's what our company focuses on, and we deliver software solutions to help manage and track that area of the yard. We've said this a lot on this podcast, how the yard is often treated as a black hole, as the cost of doing business, as just another area of the operation that gets overlooked. But recently, over the last probably 5 to 10 years, it's been getting a lot more visibility, a lot more eyeballs, a lot more dollars spent on yard management. And that has birthed a lot of technology. On this podcast in the past, we've talked about technology kind of in the early days of yard management that's still around. RFID is a big piece. We've talked about newer technology as well, gate automation and some AI stuff as well for being able to check in and out assets from a facility. But today, we're focused on vehicles, autonomous vehicles, drones, and electric yard trucks. So to kick us off, Seve, I want to start with autonomous vehicles. What is your opinion on autonomous vehicles? Are they overhyped or are they helpful?
Uh, if I had to answer that question now, Colin, at the current state, I would say overhyped.
Okay.
But it's leaning to the end of the spectrum where it will be common to see a yard with autonomous vehicles out there, autonomous yard trucks. And let me explain a little bit about that. So, as you've mentioned, I've been involved with several organizations that have reached out to me and said, hey, we're building autonomous vehicles, but we have no idea of operations and warehouse operations and yard operations. We need you to come in and sort of fill that gap. So what can you help us with? What can you share with us about, some of the pitfalls that we may encounter? So, we discuss things like, first and foremost, reefers. If your location has reefer units on there, there's processes in the reefer process that have you, let's say, for example, do a pre-cool task. There's no more yard driver in that yard truck that can get that task and go do that pre-cool task. Similarly, when you have an autonomous vehicle backed up to trailer, you have to have a special type of warehouse that allows you to open up doors from the inside out, and then also ramps that allow you to load and unload that merchandise because of those doors as well too. So a lot of times what they do is try and figure out with workarounds how that can be done. So with an atomic vehicle, with an autonomous vehicle, when you back up that trailer to a dock door, how are those doors going to get open? You can't rely on someone on the dock to do it because they won't open into the warehouse. So you come up with these little processes where you basically drop that trailer 5 feet away from the dock itself, and then have someone go out there and open up those doors, whether it be someone in the warehouse or some other person, and then have that autonomous vehicle push that trailer all the way back to the door. So the challenge then becomes, do we drop it at 5 foot, wait for someone to open the doors, and then drop it and then push it back all the way to the doors? How is that process, that flow going to work? So it's little things like that that the autonomous vehicle still cannot totally compensate for from a standpoint of having an actual person driving that vehicle. Um, and there's some shortcomings there. Now,
Yeah.
that's not to say that everything can be overcomeable, because it can be. A simple thing too that I think we talked about this a few weeks ago as well too, was it may have been internally, where we talk about the glad hands.
Mm,
How are you going to put those lines for the brakes on the glad hands to make sure that you have brakes on that trailer when you're moving it from point A to point B?
yep.
Again, that's typically done by a person, the yard driver, to connect those glad hands onto that trailer unit. And for those of you not familiar with glad hands, it's basically the lines that have air that connect to the trailer so that the trailer brakes operate properly.
Hmm.
There's a blue one and there's a red one. The red one's for emergencies, but essentially all you need is one of those on there to operate the brakes. So how is that going to get done? So you and I have talked to customers that are interested in this stuff, and we've talked about the similar type of conversations with them. And they realize that, yeah, there are still some shortcomings that have not, or uh, some processes that still have not been cracked from a standpoint of
Hmm.
understanding how that's going to be done. But at the end of the day, do I feel as though that is going to be something that's going to be commonplace in a yard, let's say 5 or 10 years from now? Absolutely, I do. I think they're smart enough engineers that can figure out a way to attach a glad hand to a trailer, as well as find a process to be able to open up dock doors to allow those trailers to go back to the door. Uh, you know, Companies are interested in this as well too, because it does save time and money from an autonomous vehicle standpoint. And then on top of that too, from a safety standpoint, you no longer have drivers in there that may, have an accident out in the yard by either jumping in and out of that cab, whatever the situation may be. So the simple answer for now, Colin, is I think it's a little hype. But at the end of the day, I think we'll get to the point where it's going to be commonplace to see autonomous yard trucks out in the yard.
Yeah, that's a great roll up. I mean, what's interesting to me is when we think about autonomous vehicles, taking myself out of kind of my job and our company for a minute, when I just think of autonomous vehicles, I think of, the Tesla self-driving feature, or I think of, over the road autonomous vehicles. I think of, robot taxis in San Francisco and these sorts of things that are in the news a lot, right? And I think on that standpoint, most of the world so far is in agreement that over the road driverless vehicles are still a ways out. That's one of those things that requires a lot of legislation. There's a lot of safety considerations, and is the technology there? Who's at fault? Right, insurance things to keep in mind as well. And I would say definitely on the over the road side, uh, right now very much overhyped. But when you look at the yard, there's not nearly as many considerations. There are still many, to your point. There are still several from an operational side that need to be accounted for, but there's not all of the legislation and quite as many security concerns as you would get driving a huge semi truck through a populated area, for example.
Sure.
So you're right. I completely agree with you. A little bit overhyped right now. We do see. I've even seen. I was on Twitter the other day, and I saw one of the guys I follow was at a Walmart distribution center, and they were testing out a driverless yard vehicle. And so I think you're starting to see large companies put a little bit of investment to test it out, see what are the requirements, what are the costs, what are the benefits, are there any security concerns or safety concerns rather? What's the overall spend going to look like? And the only way to do that is to try it out. So as that feedback comes back, I think you're right. We're going to start seeing more and more of this happen. Um, the other piece that I'll just throw in for autonomous vehicles in the yard is uh, in order for an autonomous vehicle to go move something in the yard, it needs to know where that asset is located. And that has to be either fed to it or it needs to have onboard sensors to be able to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
This is where a YMS, a dedicated YMS, can be extremely helpful for locating and sending move instructions, whether you're have manned jockey vehicles or unmanned. Having a central repository of information for where things are in your yard, with the ability to integrate out to these tools, just makes it extremely easy from the side of the data. So I would say if you're the type of company that is interested in one day in preparing yourselves now for a one day eventual test, trial, or implementation of autonomous yard vehicles, one of the best first steps you can take is to implement a yard management system and get
Mm-hmm.
that in place, because that will be needed if you want to go the hardware route on this.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, officially stamped, overhyped, but for right now, and hopefully will be very helpful in the future.
That's exactly right.
All right, let's shift gears. Drones. We see this. I get this almost every trade show. Somebody comes up and they ask a question. Can you guys do drones? How do we do? From the yard management standpoint, I think there's a large desire for operations that are suffering from a lot of yard checks to automate that process, right? And they go, we're sending people out to the yard for 5-6 hours a day, just walking around, writing down on a piece of paper where assets are, so that then we can put that into our spreadsheet. What if we could just have a drone fly overhead and do that for us? Seve, overhyped or helpful?
I will state that this is overhyped as well. I mean,
Why?
I will share with you why. So there's a lot of considerations when you're talking about drones. And let's talk about some of the major ones first and foremost. Number one, uh, weather is a big impact on this, obviously. So, if you live in Seattle, that's probably not a good idea to go out there and buy a drone to be able to do this kind of stuff.
Sure.
Secondly, how are you going to use that drone? Is it mainly just a vision system that is reading the scat code and trailer numbers and the position that it's in? Or are you using something like an RFID tag that needs to be read off that particular parking location and drone combination to give you a GPS coordinate of where that tractor's at? Again, it's just a very complicated solution for a drone to do that automated process when again you have considerations such as weather. You have to have a federal licensed pilot to fly that drone inside of your property if you're doing business, flying drones. So that's another stepping stone, that you have to have licensed pilots in your organization to fly these drones as well. In addition to that, drones have a battery life, just like your cell phone does. Unfortunately, that battery life for a drone is not that long. So you can do maybe one fell swoop of a aisle down a yard and identify what those trailers are. But guess what? That drone then needs to fly back to you. You may need to change the battery, have batteries available, etc. From an operational standpoint, there's a lot of things that people don't think about with respects to the use of drones. And these are some of the things that they're going to encounter. Again, how do you swap a battery out? How do you have the batteries out there in the field to be able to swap them out? Do you have enough batteries there to swap them out where you don't have to charge them while you're doing this? Are you going to charge them while you're doing that? And how do you, charge them at that point as well too when you're out in the field? There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things in that environment that takes a lot of consideration. And I've been involved not only with drones on the outdoor side, but also on the indoor inside the four walls of the warehouse. And again, I think, 5, 10 years ago, there was a big hype over drones in general because it was something new. It was something that companies were taking advantage of. And don't get me wrong, I think there's purposes and uses for drones in other industries.
For
Cell
sure.
tower, examining cell towers is a perfect example of that. But out in a yard, again, there's too much movement. There's too much going on in a yard. That's the other thing too. That there's rules designed to keep people safe. So you're not supposed to be flying drones over people as well either, unless you have their permission to do that. And again, you're not going to be going out. and asking for permission of drivers that are out in the yard whether you can fly that drone over their heads or not. You may be able to do that on the gate on entry, but again, you may have someone say, "No, I don't want that thing flying over my head," and then what are you going to do? So
Right.
again, it was a great idea in concept, but I think that once companies started getting into the operational piece of it and started realizing some of the shortcomings of it, it didn't really mature as a product for out in the on the yard type of activities. Um, Trust me, I absolutely loved working with the drones. It was in a different realm that I was accustomed to, and I learned so much doing that. And we were doing these drones autonomously as well too. So there was no manual flying of that drone itself. It was all doing it on its own. But at the end of the day, again, the operational aspects of maintaining a drone, making sure you have correct flying conditions, making sure that you have an eye on that drone at all times, make sure you have pilots at hand to be able to do that, make sure you have batteries that can be interchanged and flown again. There's just a lot of operational things that make that uh, what appears to be a very good solution into a very weak solution when you look at all the operational shortcomings that type of solution has.
I'm in full agreement with you. I think this gets the overhyped stamp as well.
Yeah,
Um, it is one of those things that feels very futuristic. It feels very like, yeah, that's we're all, man is destined to just take to the air. This is what we all want to do. But it has so many operational considerations, concerns, and costs associated with it that when you do the cost benefit analysis, look, this is why we see so many companies that are out there who their entire company is about vision systems. It's about using vision systems and AI to track what's going on at a facility. I've done a demo with a company in the past that was using radar for something very similar out at a facility, or even at like retails and grocery stores for pedestrian crosswalks to help keep pedestrians safe, and to be able to track where people were in real time, things like this. All of these companies have decided we're going to go the stationary route. We're going to put cameras, sensors in specific areas to get a 360-degree view of the operation, and then we're going to use those feeds to do really cool things with them. Why do you need a drone then?
yeah,
And that's really what it comes down to. Is there are other ways of accomplishing this that are less cost prohibitive, less concerns as far as barriers to entry, like the FAA licenses and like battery swapping and all of that. There's just not much of a solution there. So that
yeah,
gets the overhyped stamp. As much as I would love to work with drones and to go out and fly them,
yeah,
unfortunately,
yeah.
all hype.
I'll add my famous hashtag that I use on LinkedIn every now and then, which is hashtag You Can Trust Me.
You got the experience. You've got the blood, sweat, and tears in the business.
Yeah,
Hashtag you can trust
and
me,
the
babe.
scars to prove it too.
The scars to prove it. That's right. All right, our last one that we're going to tackle today in this hardware vehicle rendition of Overhyped or Helpful is electric yard trucks. So a little bit different. Sometimes the Venn diagram of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles is very overlapped. I've seen a lot of
Yeah.
companies where the autonomous vehicles are also electric. But there are also electric yard trucks out there that are fully manned, just like any other vehicle. But
Mhm.
instead of relying on gasoline or diesel, it relies on a battery, similar to the Teslas and the similar cars, consumer cars that we have now. So, overhyped or helpful, Seve, electric yard trucks.
They are helpful. And let me go into this a little bit. A lot of organizations, especially we talked a little bit about this, I think, in our last podcast as well, too, for California, the WARE
Yep.
program, where they're tracking, what the emissions are for some of these companies, larger companies are. An electric vehicle is a perfect, solution for that. The challenges, though, with it again are simply, hey, how are you going to spend time to charge that vehicle while you still have moves going on in the yard?
Mm-hmm.
And there's ways to combat that. You don't necessarily want to charge an electric vehicle and then let it go down to zero and then charge it back up again. So there are ways to combat that. And again, I think that the electric vehicle market, from a standpoint of yard trucks, is going to be growing exponentially. We've already seen that internally as well too, from customers that we've spoken to.
Hmm.
And their sometimes concerns is, how would you react, or how do you treat those situations where we may have electronic or EVs out there in the yard? Essentially, it doesn't matter to us from that standpoint. We're going to still do the same processing, etc. The only thing that's now going to come into play now, though, is that when your EV battery level gets to a certain value, we're probably going to have to tell you, hey, you're going to have to go charge that thing. And
Right.
then, do you have a backup for that vehicle? Things of that nature. The number of drivers that you have in your yard obviously will play a big portion of that as well too. If you have one driver, how do you determine what that time frame is, and how long do you run it without actually being charged? So there's some things to consider there still, but
Hmm.
in my opinion, EVs are very much something that's going to be the wave of the future as well. I mean, we've seen it with EV cars. I mean, there's so many models out there now. I think General Motors has a plan to have every vehicle in their fleet to be an EV vehicle by, believe it was 2030. So it's coming.
Hmm.
So from that standpoint, I think that's a very helpful proposition. And I will not give the EV vehicles in the yard the overhyped stamp.
All right. We got the official helpful stamp, and I also agree with you on this one. I mean, some of the things that popped into my head when I think about electric vehicles, and look, people have opinions about this on the consumer sector, and I get it.
Yeah,
There are always concerns with new technologies coming on board. How much of this is greenwashing, so to speak, that's not really having a positive impact on the environment, but looks like it is. But I
yeah,
think when you look in a place like the yard, there are some real tangible benefits. Sure, environmental benefits, reduction in carbon footprint, that's something that facilities are absolutely tracking. We see this even with our customers who are using standard emissions type vehicles, yard
mhm,
vehicles, where they're looking to reduce their emissions, not only because it reduces uh, from a green standpoint CO2, but also because it reduces costs associated with things like refueling.
sure.
But also, operational costs generally are lower for electric vehicles than they are with traditional diesel trucks.
Hmm.
A lot of times, there's a reduction in maintenance requirements as well.
Yep,
Um,
yep,
and then you've got, like you mentioned, states like California, government incentives, regulations that are favoring electric vehicles, incentivizing that. That's very much there. And then there's some soft benefits too. I mean, improving workplace environment, reducing noise. There's something to be said for kind of getting into a vehicle as a yard jockey, and it's a little bit more zen. It's a little bit more calm, and you're just
sure.
kind of plugging in and making it happen. Um, Absolutely some operational considerations there, as there are with anything. With a standard emissions vehicle, you got to refuel them, right? With an electric vehicle, you got to charge them, so you got to have the infrastructure for that, and that may take a little bit of an investment. I was at a facility here in the Central Valley in California. Now, this would work in places like California, but again, maybe not so much in Seattle. Sorry to you Seattleites out there that were picking on
Yeah,
you today, but this facility had invested in a tremendous solar infrastructure that they were then storing and using to charge their electric vehicles on site. So
fantastic.
rather than just pulling from the grid, they were actually kind of self-providing that in-house, which again, if you put in the investment, may end up being a long-term solution for your
Yeah.
facility.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Colin, as well too. I recently saw videos of electric vehicles, actually electric taxis in China, and they have an infrastructure there where essentially the taxi goes into what looks like a car wash bay. They
Okay.
remove the bottom of the battery, replace it with a new fresh battery, and off they go. So again, there are methods to combat that type of situation. On top of that, too, the chargers are getting to the point now where you can get a DC charger that can charge a unit in half the time as well too. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that technology is going to improve over time as well too. So instead of waiting 4 hours for a yard truck to completely charge, you may be waiting 15 minutes. So it's those types of things that can be then done either during a break, during the lunch break, and then you've got your power back up in that unit. Again, those types of technology is already out there, not necessarily for yard trucks, but it is available in some form or fashion in other types of industries.
Yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense when organizations are used to kind of figuring out the infrastructure for charging batteries for forklifts, for example, inside of the
Yep,
warehouse, and I think extending that into the yard is not that big of a quantum leap in our brains, but
exactly.
still requires a little bit of decision making before some operations will pull the trigger on this.
Sure.
So for today, we got two hypes and a helpful. Autonomous vehicles, kind of hype right now, but maybe one day will be helpful. Hopefully, one day will be helpful. Drones, kind of all hype there. Really, there's other solutions that do what drones claim to do in the yard, and do it cheaper and do it better.
Yep.
And then electric yard trucks, helpful, worth looking at, worth potentially pursuing for your operation. Seve, I was thinking we were going to get some hot takes from you today, or that we were going to disagree on something, but I think we're kind of in alignment here.
Yeah, we are in
What?
alignment, but you and I have had several discussions about this as well too. On top of speaking to many customers asking us the same types of questions, I will be happy the day that we get an RFP and it does not include any questions about drones in there.
Yes. Yes, this is something that again, you think you as a kid growing up watching the Jetsons or whatever, you go one day everything's gonna be flying. Oh, here it
Yeah.
is. It's here, baby. Maybe not so much. Maybe not so much. Well, if you disagree with Seve and I, if you think that our overhyped or helpful, or our helpful is overhyped, let us know it either in the comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this, send us a note. If you feel like you have something to share that maybe would help broaden this conversation, it'll be helpful for us to take into account. We'd love to hear from you. Seve and I are both on LinkedIn. You can engage us there. We would ask if you could like and share and subscribe to this podcast. That would be amazing. And until next time, on the next rendition of Overhyped or Helpful, we hope that you all have a great intro to the summer here. And we look forward to bringing you another episode of the YMS Podcast very soon.